Hi everybody. So we are at Moser Cie's manufacturer in Schaffhausen. I'm joined by Edouard Malin, who, what would you call yourself? The co-CEO, co-founder?
CEO and co-owner.
CEO and co-owner of Moser Cie?
Our family are owners. So.
Your family owners, okay.
So we co-own with my brother and my sister.
Oh, okay.
My parents.
Nice. Wow. So it actually went from a family business to another family business then.
Yeah. I mean, the story of Moser is really about families and entrepreneurs. And we are the last one in the list so far.
So far.
But there's been quite a few before now.
Right now, we're going to focus on the making of the Armoury and Moser's collaboration, the Total Eclipse. So shall we start with talking a little bit about the case? We're also joined by Martina, our lovely watchmaker, who is going to dismantle, reassemble a Total Eclipse in front of us, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the case of this watch.
Well, you remember where we started. I think the idea of the Total Eclipse was to create kind of the ultimate elegant Moser watch. And to be honest, I think the Endeavour case is the original Moser case. That's the first one. When I acquired Moser in 2012, there was one collection, and that was the Endeavour. There were different names at that time, but that was the one. Today, what we did is together we developed and produced the thinnest and the smallest diameter that we ever produced. There's a long discussion about the choice of the movement and a few challenges. But what's interesting is really that this is the original case that was what brought Moser back to life back in 2005. There was a gap before that. As you said, we'll talk about the history before. But this was designed by our historical designer, which is Markus Eilinger. Went through different phases. We were discussing last night about the automotive. I see cases a little bit in the same way where over time you rework the curves, the angles, the way light hits the logs, for example, and this is the latest evolution, but as I said, the thinnest and the smallest diameter.
Yeah, I love this shape. You know, it's very elegant.
A lot of details.
A lot of details. It's one of those cases where you really don't get a sense of it just from the front. Like
What's
the
very
profile is
complicated,
beautiful.
The profile, I mean, all our watches cases are three-dimensional. So we have here what we call the free forms, or the forme gauche in French. So all the angles, you cannot come and take like a segment and make this curve. It's you come with what we call the fraise boule, which allows you to create a form that has infinite angles. And what makes it so beautiful? So on the side of the case, you cannot stamp it like most manufacturers do. You really need to carve it, and that takes more time, but that creates all those beautiful reflections that you discover. But it makes also a big challenge because we combine two types of finishing on the case. We have the polishing, just to be perfect, and then you have the satinage, so the brushed finishing. The challenge when you combine those two is the limit between the two. So the biggest focus that we have every time we finish those cases is how the finishing, the finishing line between the brush and the polish, how neat it is, how clean it is. And when it's not, and sometimes when you brush, you go slightly over the line, then you need to start again.
Yeah.
So that's what makes a beautiful case, but that makes a nightmare for the watchmakers.
It's delicate work. But it's funny too, like once the case is in your hand, like you can tell there's like something a little different about it, you know? As we are, have our wrists right now, right?
We're testing them.
Yeah, this is the wear testing.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we were talking about. And I'm sure we can make some macro shots of that. It's really this transition where you have on the lugs you have these free forms which have a lot of curves and polished, and then the straight sides which are brushed. The transition between the two is a nightmare. Yeah. But that makes the beauty of that case.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is the sort of case shape you couldn't make in classical watchmaking, right? Like you go back 100 years, there's no way really to make this case, especially in industrial way.
You could do one a year or something because it's a lot of elements that you couldn't. I mean, you didn't have the tools to do that. I think it's really kind of 21st century classics type of thing,
which I think is very exciting.
Yeah, but
making new classics.
Moser is a lot. If you look at our collections. There's a little bit of an organic element in there, and organic is something that you cannot, it's difficult to reproduce in an industrial manner, but a lot of curves and not the traditional, very geometrical approach of watchmaking, more organic, and you see it in this watch, but for example the Streamliner, which is our latest collection, is even more so.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Almost reptilian.
It is, or a little bit insect-like. What is it? Arthropod-like. There we go. Arthropod-like. The bezel. The bezel was a big point of focus when we were doing the design of this watch.
Well, it was definitely your focus.
Yeah, it was an integral part of the kind of the concept of this whole thing. Now Moser's always done concave bezels on the case, but this is the first time that you've integrated also an internal bezel as well, and then also have it polished and attached into the case, and that's what kind of creates that effect. I don't know. How did you feel when you first got that? When you first heard we wanted to do that?
I was skeptical because, to be honest, as you said, we've never done it. I was afraid that it would kind of close down the dial. I like to open as much as possible. If you see that in many of our creations, we have very thin bezels, and here we have a relatively optimized, thin, very nice bezel, and having an inner bezel, I thought would kind of close down. But it's difficult when you design it and you work with the designers because everything you do is flat.
Yeah.
And then you do the 3D printing, and then you don't have the reflection. It's all gray, and you're like, okay, is it going to work? I mean, it creates a little bit of distance, and then you see the final result, where suddenly that's what gives life to the dial and the watch itself.
Yeah.
And I love it, and I like the idea that we went through the process exploring something new that we wouldn't have done otherwise. Yeah. And especially clean and polished as we did it in that case.
I think so.
If I had done something like this and said, okay, we need an inner bezel as we did, for example, for our Pioneer collection, then I would have put a structure. Yeah. I always thought, no, it would be too empty. It would be maybe create weird reflections. And actually that's what makes the beauty, and that's what makes the name. Yeah. I mean, without the inner bezel, it wouldn't be a total eclipse.
It's true, yeah.
I think it's really one extremely important element of the design.
Yeah, because when we were first working on the design, we actually were going to put markings on the inner bezel, and I'm really glad we dropped that, and we really just went for a high polish. Because like you said, like the reflections are really important, and the way light plays around inside the case, off the crystal, against the Vantablack, I think it's a beautiful effect. It's a really beautiful effect.
Well, there's no reflection on the Vantablack, but on the rest, and that's what makes the contrast.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Vantablack, because the Vantablack is one of the stars of this show. So can you introduce briefly what Vantablack is?
So Vantablack means vertically aligned nanotubes array. So that's Vanta and black because it looks black. It's actually not black, it's gray. These are nanotube of carbons vertically aligned, as the name says. It's a nanotechnology developed for the NASA. They were using it on different instruments, for example, telescopes. The inner coating of telescopes is coated with Vantablack because you want to avoid as much as possible reflections when you're trying to take a very accurate picture of a star far, far away in the galaxy or in another galaxy. Any reflection would make the accuracy smaller. And that's why they created that material which absorbs any reflections. So the light coming in, the photons go inside the structure. So it's this structure that you can compare to, I mean, we have a forest here. Imagine a forest with normal density. The trees would be about 3 kilometers high, like 2 miles, 1.5 miles high. So the light comes in this forest, but never comes out. And that's the secret of the Vantablack. So it's a gray structure that turns out black because it absorbs 99.98% of the light. It's a nightmare to work with. Yeah. That's why only Moser uses it. But we wanted, we're known for the fumé dials. Sometimes we think, we need to, I mean, a lot of people are doing the Moser fumé dials nowadays. I mean, it's become a trend that we started 10 years ago, and we always need to push the boundaries. And one day I said, it would be nice to have a black dial, but we cannot do the normal black dial like the others. Yeah. And that's when Vantablack came into the picture, and it was a long process to learn. We developed a lot of tools and processes to be able to work with this material. But today we have masters like Martina who really know how to assemble a watch with a Vantablack dials. She has developed her own tools. We have a team that worked on the processes, and now we are really the masters of the Vantablack.
It shows, for sure. It's a very tricky material to work with. I mean, just watching you guys and telling me and knowing a little bit about what it takes to manipulate this material, it's super interesting.
I mean, I was telling you the anecdote, like the first times we assembled the hands, you cannot touch the dial with the hands. On a normal dial, you can. It doesn't damage it. But on the Vantablack dial, if the hands touch slightly the structure, you have a big risk that one of those vertical
the nanotubes
falls. And when it falls on the next next one, and it creates like a domino effect. And it happened the first few times when we didn't know what was happening. You would set the hands, leave the watch, start testing it, and then a day later you had like a gray circle around it, and then a day later the circle was a little bit. The disc, it became a disc, was bigger, and we're like, what was happening? And then we started with microscope looking at it and realized that the structure had been broken, and then it created like small domino effect.
That's funny.
So we had to learn how to avoid that.
Yeah.
And nowadays we have our own tooling. Of course, we cannot show too much because these are our secrets, but that's what allows us to create those amazing pieces.
Elliot, do you mind getting just a close-up shot of the Vantablack as Martina's working on it?
Yeah, that's the most beautiful way to look at Vantablack is when there's nothing on top of it. Unfortunately, we have to protect it. That's why we put a double-coated sapphire crystal on it, which still has a little bit of reflection. But if you look at the Vantablack like this, it's like looking at a black hole. Sometimes your eye cannot even focus. It doesn't know what it's looking at.
Ah, really?
Yeah, your brain has a hard time understanding what Vantablack is.
Yeah. I remember I was on a Zoom call with one of your colleagues, and she was showing me the Vantablack dial, like in the carrier on camera, and it was nothing, right? Like it was like my monitor had broken in that little area. So fascinating. So
the nightmare with Vantablack dials is dust. I mean, if a small piece of dust lands on the dial, then it becomes a spotlight. It attracts all the light, and even though it's a tiny dust that maybe on a normal dial nobody would see it. On Vantablack, it attracts the entire attention because it just attracts all the light. So
and it's not cleanable, right? Like once that happens.
Well, we can spray a little bit of air. I mean, we have some tools, but we need to regulate. I mean, you cannot go full power as we would on a normal dial. So that's something we learned as well. But yeah, I mean, it's you have to be extremely careful the way we have the transition of air on top of the dial to avoid dust coming in.
Super interesting. You mentioned before that as you're installing the Vantablack dial, like it's not just skill among your watchmakers, it's also like production techniques you came up with. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, at Moser we try to be very efficient, to go through a lot of phases of optimization, and that's a lot of work between our engineers and our watchmakers. They constantly work together and saying how can we do better, faster, higher quality. Because we need efficiency. Good watchmakers shouldn't be adjusting everything all the time. They need to get the parts and have the processes so that it works very clean and very quickly, so that at the end the final product is reliable. And that's our most priority, is really to have the most reliable products. And we spend a lot of time in the development phases together with the watchmakers, thinking, okay, what do we want to achieve? How are we going to assemble it? Because there's nothing worse than a movement that has been developed without thinking of the watchmaker who's going to spend time on assembling this part, and then sometimes you don't have the view on that element that you should to be able to regulate and assemble the watch. And I think we have a great team because all those young people, you've seen pretty young people, love to work together and discuss and throw the ideas and challenge each other. And the result is amazing. I mean, we have some products that are produced in very small quantities, but have kind of a very, I wouldn't say industrialized, but a very optimized development behind it. Whereas a lot of, I would say, other brands with our quantities tend sometimes to, and that was the problem with Moser when we took over, to commercialize products that are still in a prototype or pre-series level. We went all the way to kind of what would be an industrialization product.
Yeah, I had a chat with your head of watchmaking earlier,
Rafi.
and yes, Rafi, and it was interesting to hear him talk about how important consistency was. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right?
Of course.
And I think that a lot of people who
even on small quantities,
exactly. Like it's not just about speed; it's about making something that's going to be the same every time, so that you can really count on it.
I mean, we have iPads explaining, I mean, for people like Martina, who is a master watchmaker working with us for, 12 years and has been assembling perpetual calendar every month, they still have their iPads to know step by step, because it's important also for us and for the future to know how people assemble. When we started, everybody had their own way. And then when the watch would come back for a service, you had to think, okay, who assembled it? Okay, what was his way? What could be the problem? You would spend more time trying to understand what the problem was, knowing who had assembled the watch, than actually repairing it.
Yeah. I think this
today,
is something,
it's really stories. Today, they have the same steps all the time. And even though it's become almost automatic, keep in mind, a perpetual calendar take up to 35 hours to assemble. So that's almost a full week of work. So you cannot remember everything, even though she's done probably a few hundreds of them over the years. But still, they have a process and they follow it step by step. And that's important to them, but also very important for us in the future.
Yeah. I think people who appreciate watches sometimes forget that kind of the old way, quote unquote, of making watches was that you really had to adjust parts on an individual basis, like because not every part would be the same, and so sometimes you get one that's a little bit thicker, a little bit wider, and you have to like by hand make it work, you know. And
that was the case for Moser many years ago, still, and that's where we had to go one step further, because you cannot, when you have a movement with 326 parts like our perpetual calendar, you cannot adjust 30 or 40 50 of them, because it takes hours. And a watch that works today doesn't mean it will work tomorrow. What you need is perfect parts from day one, and that's what we worked a lot on.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think it's really amazing. Okay, sorry, we went on a real sidetrack there.
There's tons of stories.
There are tons of stories. I mean, I'm glad you're spending this time with us. I really appreciate it. Why don't we talk a little bit about the hands? Yeah, because the hands were something, you know, I've always liked Breguet hands, and when I went to visit your museum, I was like, oh, the hands that Moser does are really, really nice. I would love to try and bring them back, you know, and I think it worked out. I think it worked out really beautifully. Like, you haven't used those Breguet hands for very many watches either, have you?
No, we did a special edition a few years back with Brian Ferry, I don't know if you remember, with Arabic numerals. Also, kind of a similar process. Didn't go as far as we did with you, Mark, but we went to the museum and he picked a few elements that he liked, and then we created a watch together with him. But yeah, I think there's a really rich history at Moser, and as you've seen at the museum, tons of amazing watches through the different eras. You know, pocket watches from the 19th century, beautiful converted watches from the early 20th century, beautiful watches from later on, Art Deco, pilot watches, and of course the Breguet hands has been, of course, at first at Breguet, but since then many brands have used it, and Moser mastered it on a few products, and that's probably what caught your eye.
It definitely was. I mean,
and I think it works well on this, especially with the Vantablack, because the hand becomes also a very important element. And you can really see all the details of the hands, because there's just no reflection. And that's where a Breguet hand is so nice, because you have the straight lines, you have the curves, you have the circle, and the inner finishing, etc., which you can fully appreciate on a watch like this one.
Like when we were putting this design together, the idea of using a lot of circles as part of the look of the watch was really important to us, you know. So obviously you have the inner bezel, you also have the circles on the ends of the Breguet hands, but even also like that little lollipop at the end of the sub-seconds, you know.
Small second,
Yeah, like that was, that all kind of factored into
this floating small second.
It is very much a floating small second.
I think that keeps the watch alive. I always like, some people love watches that have just two hands. I personally like the idea of having, and sometimes from a design standpoint it makes sense, but I like the idea that a watch, you need to see it alive, and you don't want to have to turn it around to see the escapement, the heartbeat. Here you have this beautiful floating small second. I think that gives life to the product.
Yeah, it really kind of emphasizes it, like emphasizes the movement, because it's on such a black background. We kind of missed this earlier, but I wanted to go back to it for a second. So with Vantablack, obviously Vantablack doesn't reflect anything. And so the challenge is always like visually making the most of that effect. And it's hard, because you have to put a crystal on top of it. But you guys did a lot to your crystal to at least like make the most out of the situation.
Well, we started with Vantablack on the Venture collection, which is a dome sapphire. What we came to realize is, even with a double coating, the best coating on both sides of the sapphire, because it's dome, you still have a lot of reflections. And that's, I mean, we started, and we accepted on a few tourbillons, that's all we did with Vantablack until now. Now, what's interesting with this one is that it's the first one we integrated into the Endeavour, in a small size, small diameter, pretty flat sapphire. So you can really, I mean, there's always a little bit of reflection, but you get very close to perfection. The only way to have full appreciation of the Vantablack would be to remove the sapphire crystal, but that would be, I mean, the watch would probably last a few seconds, and then
exactly, you're appreciating it until it is completely destroyed. But until then, it's great.
But as long as it's under a sapphire crystal double coated, you will see very little reflection, and it will be fully protected. So there's no risk of the Vantablack being damaged.
Yeah, do you think there is some technological breakthrough someday in the future where
Sure, I'm sure there could be new families of crystals. We're talking, even with graphene type of elements, which will improve its transparency. Even though those sapphires seems to be amazing, there's probably ways to do even better in the future with nanotechnology. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. In fact, speaking of things that are, obviously going to be 5-10 years in front of you, movements take a while, don't they? Movements take a while to develop and to deploy. Can you tell us a little bit about this movement?
Yeah, this movement is, the choice of the movement that we were discussing, we want to make elegant, we want to make thin, we want to make classic. Obviously for us, the manual wound movements is, in that sense, a must. Moser is known for the beautiful manual wound movements, kind of three-quarter bridges. For me, this is a modern interpretation of traditional pocket watches movement with the small second, fully hand wound, almost like three-quarter bridge. That's what you would expect from brands in the early 20th century. And that's the beauty of Moser. I like to combine tradition with modernism. You have the Vantablack, this nanotechnology. On the other side, you're using almost like a pocket watch antique movement. Of course, it's a modern movement. It's at 3 hertz, so very accurate. Very smooth, small second. You have a beautiful power indication at the back. It's a 3 to 5 days power reserve, so it's very nice. You can, if you don't want to wear it on the weekend, for example, because you wear something more sporty, then you leave it on whatever you store your watches, and then on Monday it's still working. And that's what we like. And very smooth. We have special teeth on our gears. So it makes it extremely smooth to wind it up. We have a beautiful crown that we optimize over the years also to have like a nice grip, very smooth. It's kind of the special relation you have with a hand-wound watch is this moment every 3 to 5 days where you kind of wind it up. We have the power at a certain movement which is 7 to 10 days. And I know some people are telling me like the highlight of my week is Sunday night when I wind up my Moser watch. It's like this, create this relationship with your watch. So that's where the crown is so important. And we have developed and we haven't changed much of the design of that crown because it's so smooth, so nice to play with. So if you look at the finishing of the movement, the typical finishing for a Moser movement, as you see it here, is, those three-quarter bridge, but with the Moser stripes. The Moser stripes are 1 wide, 1 narrow. That's the signature of Moser. The Côte de Genève, for example, are all the same dimensions. We have this difference where one is wide, one is narrow, which makes it very, very elegant. We also have the gold engraving on the movement, including the hallmark, which I'm wearing right now, and you should be wearing. I'm going to give you one afterwards.
All right. Free stuff.
No, I can do it now. Let's do it official. So this is the Moser pen or the Moser hallmark since 1828.
I'm honored.
All the movements have this signature, and it's also a way for us to identify original Moser watches, because since 1828 all the movements have this signature engraved on it.
That's lovely.
Continue to do so.
Just as a little aside, like how often do you get kind of pre-mail-in Mosers coming back?
We have emails every day of antique watches from all over the world. People saying, I have this watch, this Moser watch for my grandfather. Can you give me more information about it? So we try to support that as much as possible. We don't have all the archives, but we're trying with our curator at the museum. We work together with the family Moser today. We have a foundation to try to continue to develop, promote, protect the history of the Moser family, not only about watchmaking in general, but watchmaking is a big part of it. So we have all the time requests about information, about valuation, or even repair. We have one watchmaker who is a master for antique and traditional watches. So we try to provide that service. It's difficult to do it for everyone. Moser, during his lifetime, they produce 500,000 watches.
Wow.
We produce 1,500 a year right now. So if those 500,000 were to come back, it would be difficult to take care of. But we have also a lot of contacts of people who can handle those. Many of those watches have a lot of emotional value for the families who own them. So we try as much as possible to help them.
Fascinating. All right. Well, Edouard, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Did we miss anything? Is there anything else you'd like to cover?
I'm sure there's tons of things, but we're going to have a couple of other discussions.
That is true. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching this video. And Edouard, see you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for watching.